Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our first USC Smart VR themed talk on virtual reality and brain health. This webinar is hosted by the USC Smart VR Center, which is funded by the USC Office of Research. To learn more about our center and events, see our website at smartvr.usc.edu or follow us on Twitter at USC_SmartVR. Our speakers today will be Amir Bozorgzadeh as CEO of VirtuLeap, Jessica Ackerman as clinical liaison to the company XR Health, and finally, our two co-hosts here at USC, Associate Professor and Director of the PA Laboratory, Judy Pa, who is joined by one of her PhD students at the PA Lab, Ashwin Sakre. And following our presentations, we will be having an open Q&A session. So bring any questions that you have for any of our guests and co-hosts about their areas of expertise, more about their presentations, or any thoughts that you may have. Feel free to post questions in the chat box during the talk, and we'll come back around to them afterwards. And with that, we can switch over to our first presenter, Amir with VirtuLeap.
Thank you. And Julie, I have to say, I've never heard someone say my last name so perfectly, ever.
Wonderful.
Unless you have any Iranian relatives, maybe that's the excuse. I'm going to share my screen and get this started. So I'm Amir Bozorgzadeh. I'm still blown away by that. I'm the co-founder and CEO at VirtuLeap. We're a company that is right at the intersection of the neurosciences and virtual reality, or maybe better said, how does virtual reality unlock the neurosciences? And there's two forks in the road to have an impact for a company like ours, and it's not just healthcare, but it's also education. And in fact, I think in 5 years, maybe a little bit longer, we might be both at the same time. I do see an intersection between what is what. Sometimes something is good for you, but is also healthy for you and educational for you, and the lines are being blurred. My background is before I got into virtual reality, I wrote a lot for VentureBeat and a lot for TechCrunch, and I covered virtual reality almost exclusively. And I was always on the hunt for these critical use cases, which is really on those two categories: is education and healthcare. Anything else for virtual reality, in my humble opinion, and I drink the Kool-Aid way too much for sure, they're not critical use cases. And that was always what was the holy grail for our sector, and still is even to this day. With all the traction that we have, a lot of the investor community and so on will go, where is the critical use case? Where is the actual application of virtual reality where it does something that a previous digital format or medium, screen-based ones particularly, can already do the same job or equivalent kind of results? And virtual reality, in my opinion, has several applications in the healthcare and education front where it does in fact have a critical use case. And what we're specifically kind of addressing first and foremost, I think, as the beachhead market is cognitive disorders. Our applications are very much centered on this big array of cognitive disorders, illnesses. We're talking about attention deficit. We're talking about when some people who are taking chemotherapy, and 70% of those people suffer from cognitive impairment called chemo brain. We're talking about the autism spectrum. We're talking about even COVID increasingly being considered a neurological disorder, scary enough. Memory fog and all of these types of conditions, either contingent to some kind of treatment or something that befalls you at a certain point without you ever even having seen it coming. So for instance, I think Japan is the only country in the world that I know that it's mandatory by law that if you're employed to do a cognitive screening once a year. And yeah, I think that's, it's not actually uncommon to hear something like that about Japanese culture. It's very proactive and so on. A lot of things that get adopted there, we see happen like years later in the Western markets and so on, in Europe and North America. But I think COVID has accelerated our appreciation for mental health, mental fitness. We've seen more investments even in the first quarter of last year than all of 2019 before that. And I haven't really looked at all the numbers, but we're seeing a trend. We're seeing appreciation. And similarly on this front, we have conditions, cognitive illnesses like Alzheimer's disease that ultimately has no solution. I think someone told me recently mental health is the kind of thing that you just forget about until it's the most important thing in your life. And I think, it's a big important thing to know that even though conditions like Alzheimer's has no solution, has no cure, that once you get it, you can only really manage the symptoms with pharmaceutical drugs. There is the point of view of the best practice of getting ahead of that, making it more into our lifestyle of assessing ourselves mentally and brain fitness and brain health as a lifestyle habit or activity. And in a very similar way, I think, analogous to physical health. We look at physical health and activities we can do like running or going to the gym or healthy diets. All of these kind of activities we know because of so much study, and it's really like just penetrated into all of society, that those things will ultimately have a betterment of our physical health. And I think in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, with solutions like what Virtual Leap is creating, we're going to start seeing the gym for the mind. And that begins with being able to start to look at our mental health in a much more proactive way, being able to detect things because we're doing that regularly that we might have not have been able to for years and years. And the whole idea is this, like, we know with biomarkers like neuroimaging and brain scans that we can actually detect the functional and structural changes in the brain that is more or less leading up to a cognitive impairment situation or disorder. I believe, years and years, up to decades before it actually happens. And so being able to detect them earlier means that we can intervene earlier and at the very least delay the clinical onset of these horrible, horrible cognitive disorders. Now, the issue is that current cognitive assessment tools are very accessible. That's really fantastic what's happened in the last 10 years because they're in your pocket. Everyone has one, but they're also very limited and lacking because screen-based devices fail to track and engage our whole body. And that's where virtual reality steps in. It's the first digital format that triggers my autonomic nervous system into believing that I'm standing on top of a very tall building, and my phobia of heights is immediately triggered and my knees buckle and shake regardless. I mean, everyone who goes into VR knows this to be true, but a person like myself, I'm not kidding, I do have a phobia of heights. And in fact, I had a phobia of arachnoids and so on. And I've been able to desensitize myself to these phobias because of these types of scenarios in virtual reality that are ecologically valid and multisensory, and they trigger your vestibular balance system, your proprioception, into believing that they are real experiences. And that creates a very, very interesting and compelling and critical use case for at least the healthcare industry or sector. Now, that's what we've done. We've, on the side of cognitive assessments, we've taken all of these standardized assessment tools that have been around for decades, like the Stroop test or the NBAC test, which was created in the 1950s, and we translate them over into a 3D rendered environment that tests and trains not only the traditional kind of cognitive functions we all think about, like memory and problem solving and information processing, but also our spatial orientation, our motor control, our spatial audio awareness. And we take all of that volumetric data and bring it into one place. And this is unprecedented, first and foremost. You'd have to put together a Frankenstein of several different devices all together to be able to do what we can do with one of the best of class headsets right now. I mean, I got a Oculus Quest here. I know this is even outdated now. We got the Quest 2s. They're $100 cheaper because of Facebook's magical subsidized pricing. And I think Qualcomm's probably subsidizing the chip. So we got these great price points, but the next generation of these headsets are not just going to be more comfortable. And of course, these wires are getting away from us, but they're also going to have so many biometric add-ons. If you guys, if you all know or are aware of HP's G2 Reverb Omniset Edition, this thing has pupil eye dilation tracking. It's got heart rate variability. It's going to have add-ons like Sweat, from what I understand, from what I've talked to them. I mean, that's the next generation. You're going to have a device in a matter of maybe 1 to 2 years that, right now, this thing is at least collecting about 16, 17, maybe 20 default data points of my body positioning. It knows, it can detect the most subtle movements like trembling and handshaking. It knows whether I'm standing and sitting. But on top of that, for our games, we also are collecting the most minutia of gameplay points in the actual, like, in the experience. So we know if the person's hitting the ball with their front hand or their backhand, whether, and then we do hand comparison analysis on the back end, all of these things. And this is all just with this 3 minutes of gameplay generating about 200,000 data points. And in one full session of 15 minutes, you got well over 1 million data points. Now, put that and correlate it to all of these other biometrics like heart rate variability, like not just eye tracking, but pupil dilation tracking, inbuilt EEG. We've been doing experiments with the folks in Culver City Kernel, and we had an experiment with one of our games, which was designed based on the University of Cambridge's study on a game mechanism that was testing episodic memory, a type of long-term memory. And they found that when you play this game regularly, you increase neural activity in the part of the brain associated with schizophrenia. And that if you play it regularly enough, the symptoms of schizophrenia actually reduce. So we were doing a test like that. And you put in, EEG next to our data, and you have VR gameplay start to serve as a correlative, non-invasive way of doing, of being able to actually tell if there's deterioration, and there's a big movement towards volumetric data or other types of biomarkers in a similar way. Can we correlate it to neuroimaging scans? Can we correlate it to EEG? Can we see that across all of these different biometrics that actually are volumetric personal data from a healthcare point of view can actually in and of itself tell us as an early detector towards cognitive illnesses or an early detection of other things? I mean, our data, I think, within the volumetric, mountains of what accumulates on aggregate actually has also a lot of those amazing insights that you would see with eye tracking or neuroimaging and so on. And so there's a lot of amazing applications just on these numbers that we're looking at here. But our company, is growing a library of these closed loop games. Now, closed loop means just like traditional brain training apps out there, they're designed to level you off at the plateau of your maximum difficulty per whichever one of these, cognitive function categories that this particular game is targeting. Our, memory as the first column right there, that category, it's not just memory games. We have subtypes. And so there's a working memory game, a short-term memory game, a long-term memory game. And we've created a game scoring system called the Enhanced Performance Index, which basically was designed in collaboration with mathematicians along with neuroscientists to create a more or less like IQ quotient that you score per game that then ultimately gives you jumbles up into a category score, like your EPI score for memory, and then a universal one that takes into account all of the games across all of the different cognitive categories. And that's really important to have an objective, metric system that you create for your company in whatever proprietary way you think makes sense. Because every time we create a new game, we just plug it into this system, and it will score accordingly and properly because it's all weighted and balanced in that way. But this is an awkward slide, but it's ultimately like the basis of a lot of things that we do. We have an enterprise platform or a data portal that we're looking to work with pharmaceutical companies, primarily to actually serve as a companion diagnostic that pairs up with neuroscience-based drugs in phase 3 trials to help them better profile the patient segments that have the best possible treatment outcomes. And so as a digital companion diagnostic, we would be able to give that better profile psychographically of someone from a cognitive science point of view. And they license this technology, take that volumetric data, pair it with their trials, and let us hopefully, as the next generation of not just cognitive assessment, but the next generation of data collection, being able to help, literally hundreds of neuroscience-based drugs get approved faster, and then potentially, even when that's out into the market, be a predictor of market success. Like we'll know maybe hopefully what kind of profiles of people would best react to that particular drug. And so we have this enterprise platform, and it has very specific features that are really important because we know they're important because we've been told they are. Like for example, in a clinical setting, especially in a study, you have someone wearing a VR headset playing our games. Maybe they're disoriented for a moment. Instead of them having to remove the headset, we can use the remote control feature, or the clinician can use a remote control feature, which they can use on the web app, or even we're about to release the iOS version, and they just have it on the iPad, and they're just navigating the experience on behalf of the user or the patient. from login to games to reporting without them having to do that. Or, we had a pharma company tell us that it was very important that we took the traditional cognitive assessment battery for multiple sclerosis and take that, translate it into our library of games. And for them, they would want a playlist feature so that they can select which ones they want and eschew other ones. So how do we, just giving you like a landscape of how we are out there with all the um, the ecosystem, and maybe competitor landscape is a little too I don't know, adversarial, but it's an ecosystem that is basically in three parts. It's on the top row you got the standard pen and paper or 2D screen-based versions of the types of neurological tests that doctors would use. And then you have on the second row the brain training apps, or maybe if I want to be annoy those companies, I'll call them brain teaser apps, because from our point of view, drinking the Kool-Aid, we consider cognition to be inherently embodied. And we think, virtual reality is the only first, step in that direction where, the nonverbal aspects of the human condition actually believes the experience is real, which is ultimately will have a phenomenal, amplification of the quality of data first and foremost. And then also you're tracking all of that full body data and capturing it. So things are much more reliable, things are much more compelling, and compelling experiences. And I think we're ultimately understanding, even if you're doing a study with a POC or MVP product, that's going to have an effect on the quality of the data, because the individuals, there isn't a factor of boredom that I think takes away from the integrity of that data. But for the VR space, a lot of those companies or products, I would say, are offshoots of universities. They really plateaued at a certain point. They didn't really get past MVP. There are definitely exceptions, but companies that are focused purely on cognitive assessment or brain training games in and of itself as the only focus of the company. There's one company called Neurotrainer that I've been a fan of for a while, and they're actually focused on VR, but for athletic conditioning and sports training. We're I think the only company that is focused purely on creating a very large library of these games. Of course, you're going to see more and more of the general VR health companies having a jack of trades kind of experiences of every kind, and being more or less kind of a one-stop shop for let's say hospital partners or research partners to come in and ultimately be able to access everything there from their library. But at Virtual Leap, we're 100% only focused on cognitive assessment and training, full stop. And so we have a number of these partners across the US and Europe, and these are all academic partners. We're looking to do studies with them. In fact, in Barcelona, I'm not going to try pronouncing this name because I just realized today I've been saying it all wrong in my whole life. It's in Catalan, and I'm very embarrassed by this. But we're working with Rafael and the team that they're focused on, and they're beginning recruitment as of next month, where their focus is on doing a study using our tool, focused on diabetes type 2 sufferers and their high risk factor to developing MCI or mild cognitive impairment, and ultimately Alzheimer's. With the VA healthcare system and UCSF, we're working with them because traumatic brain injury, induces typically like, bad lifestyle patterns like addiction, and addiction causes a very high risk factor towards cognitive impairment. And so we're enabling these partners to do what they want to do, but with our technology, and we're a partner just enabling that. I'd like to go to a video that is in this article of this journalist who played this full 15-minute session. So every time you log in as a user, you indicate the number of hours you slept and your mood from a 5-point scale. And that's not ideal, because I would love it to be integrated, and we have this set up on our backend that we can actually integrate to Fitbit or smartwatches, and we're trying to stalk the smartwatch makers to partner with us on these kind of things, because then you can know, how did the person sleep 3 days before? Not to mention that it's actually biometric data that you're getting that's really real, rather than self-reported, which can be can be flawed. But at least we get this every time someone logs in, every time, and we've released a report to actually even indicate some early insights about, what do we notice when people sleep too little? How do their certain cognitive functions maybe get affected, but others don't? That's on our blog if anyone's interested in looking at it. But every time you come in, you play daily cognitive workout. That's 3 randomized games from our library, which our library is around 11 games right now. And by the end of the year, it'll be about probably 20 or so. I think it's a conservative number. And so this game is a modified Stroop test. You are basically using 2 paddles, hitting these shapes based on colors and shape type into these portals that intermittently will flip sides. And so you're task switching. Jumping ahead, here's a vestibular balance game, and that really clever name we named it. It's a balance, it's called. You got 2 plates, and you can't let those balls drop off before you achieve the goals that you're supposed to have on each of the plates. I can't wait when we have more haptics onto the kind of controllers that we have, because that kind of game doesn't have too much feeling right now. It's still very effective, but you need the more multisensory these things are, the better from our point of view. And I think we're getting down there. Here is that game that I mentioned about the University of Cambridge. It's called Magic Deck. It's the game that ultimately, with research has shown that it can actually, reduce the symptoms of schizophrenia. And so, that really blows my mind, because from a certain point of view, can our games be seen with, our partners with Kernel and EEG? Can we actually see the neural activity of certain regions of the brain increase? And sometimes, when I'm talking to neurologists, sometimes that's their focus as well. They're trying to see, when someone has depression, is there a lack of neural activity in certain parts of the brain? Can you start to do neural stimulation in some way? Or can you play an activity that's targeted to actually increase neural activity in that part of the brain? There's all these different ways of doing these, the same aim. And so these are the types of games we create. It's free for all of the 6DoF headsets, 6 Degrees of Freedom headsets, the ones that have external sensors. And so when your body moves, the content moves. I call anything that was 3 Degrees of Freedom 3DoF, like the Oculus Go. I don't call those VR headsets. I'm actually ashamed of them, because they cause a lot of nausea and stuff, and they're just like glorified 360 viewers. But I know they're a big thing, but I've always hated them. But I'm glad we don't talk about Oculus Go anymore. I want to show you now just this backend I was talking about. And so we have a number of institutional partners already logging into this system, and we worked with AWS very, very closely in the summertime to make this backend system strictly HIPAA compliant. Here in Europe, GDPR. My CTO used to have much more hair on his head before the last summer. He's lost it all. I mean, the level of protocol that we must follow when you are creating a system that is collecting data in 2021, when all of this mayhem and controversy is related to how our data can be misused. You have to follow a lot of protocol, and you have to, even when you start doing studies, of course, you have to do a lot of consent-based kind of processes and put them in there. And this reflects all of that. We have designed this platform, and you can see the 15,000 or so early users who have come in, and they just kind of trickle in. They find us on the different app stores, and we don't market it or anything, but this is for testing purposes. They've stress tested our game scoring system. Sometimes we release certain games as prototype, and then we allow them to maybe people to come and opt in to play those games, and then help us stress test or see if the game has any issues, or certain bugs that we need to either address or maybe just throw the whole thing out. And it's very useful for those purposes. Right now, we're not a B2C company, so to speak, but the level of player interaction is invaluable to us. But everything is collected here. Organizations get their own account, and then they can create their own users. A number of institutes are using this right now as we speak for youth-based traumatic brain injury, sports-related, cognitive disorders. Of course, mild cognitive impairment and dementia is a huge focus of ours, but these are more long strip, more of a long-term kind of projects. Like the study that's starting with the Barcelona partner next month is a 24-month study. So there's no, quick way to go around some of these projects. But, that's pretty much my story, my background on our company. I'd love to be able to throw it out to back to you all and answer any questions you have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amir. That was fantastic. Next, we'll be transitioning to Jessica over at XR Health.
Hi there, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. All right. Can everyone see this?
Yeah, I can see it.
You don't see it.
Yes, I can.
Yes, you're good?
We can see it. It looks good.
You can see it. Okay, super. Because I can't see you now. So, but I'm Jessica Ackerman. I am a speech language pathologist. I have 20 years of experience working in the field of cognition, speech language, neurorehabilitation, and I've been with XR Health for about 9 months, and we are an immersive integrative therapy application. So we are taking rehabilitation and PT, OT, speech, mental health, and we're basically incorporating it into people's homes remotely and totally switching things up through virtual reality. So I'm going to go through a little bit of this presentation and just kind of show you what we're doing. So basically the therapy industry has been the same for 200 years. I mean, back in the 19th century doesn't look too much different than today's gym. And people are doing, you know, leg raises and giving subjective measures of pain and range of motion and muscle strength testing. And so really the conventional therapy is quite unchanged for the past 200 years. PTOT speech with XR Health is innovative, immersive, and completely shifting how we collect data, analyze data, are able to give biofeedback to patients and allow providers to also get that feedback to drive their treatments. So I'll get a little more in depth to how we're doing this. So basically we are a remote clinic in a box. So we are drop shipping headset. We use the Pico, and the headset comes in the box, and then we have data portal and mobile app, and we communicate with the patient, therapist, individualized therapy via online communication. And so the patients are all doing all of this rehab from the comfort and safety of their homes, which we all know is quite on the forefront of everybody's minds right now. Our mission at XR Health is to harness extended reality technology to improve patient health, reduce costs of care, and empower the clinicians to deliver data-driven therapy for superior outcomes. So I know that's a lot of words, but really, therapists, PT, OT, speech, as Amir was talking about a few minutes ago, people are using a lot of subjective measures, things that are outdated. And right now we are able to really leverage the data that we're collecting from the headset and allow this to drive therapy, give biofeedback to patients. And it's so much more engaging and allows for functional carryover into day-to-day life. So that is creating far superior outcomes, reducing risk of rehospitalization, and giving much boastful patient satisfaction. So I'll do a short video just to give you guys. Not sure.
It's a fact that your health dictates your life.
We can hear it, but we can't see the video, I think.
Oh.
Health Clinic. You can now get professional medical treatments right at home. Meet with your
You might
XR
have your
Health
screen
clinician
share
online
set
to
to a
discuss
specific
your
window.
symptoms and begin your path to a
Hang on
better,
one
more
sec.
enjoyable recovery. Your recovery will use a state-of-the-art virtual reality
Sorry.
system, which will be sent right to your door. Welcome to the patients enjoy their recovery with XR Health.
Can you see this?
But more importantly, report a faster recovery than traditional treatments. We use virtual reality
Are
to
you able
guide your
to see it?
recovery in a simple and practical way, keeping your
not
treatment
loading.
fun, while at the same
Okay.
time sending valuable data to your clinician. You can even track your progress on our dashboard, watching your
Sorry about
recovery
that.
in real time.
All right, I apologize. I'm not sure why that wasn't working. Can you see my slide now?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So the video, I'll send a video as a follow-up to you guys. Sorry about that. I'm not sure why it's not coordinated to play right here, but anyway, I'll keep going. So basically what the video showed was just some of the applications, patients doing the applications that we have. I'll get a little further into that. But just to kind of break down how we are working with the patients, basically the patient signs up online, very seamless process on our website, or they can get a referral from their doctor. So they can register right online. It's very seamless. And then on a video call, the patient is coordinated with a therapist, either a PT, an OT, or a speech therapist, goes over a comprehensive evaluation, any contraindications, and then if the patient is well suited for VR therapy, they are shipped the headset, and then they start on their VR journey. So we have a variety of applications for cervical neck pain, shoulder range of motion. We have cognitive linguistic tasks, color match, which is like a boxing game where you're punching different colors with the different color gloves. And we have many different ability to shift into different applications. You can customize things directly to your patient. We have a Memorize application, which is basically a belt with items that come through, and you're to select the item that was on a list presented to you for a certain number of seconds beforehand. So there are a lot of cognitive linguistic applications that we provide for our patients. As the patient goes through their therapy, their data portal is holding all of their information that's collected from the headset. The physician, the patient, and the therapist are all able to view this information and these data to see their analytics. So it's very objective. Basically, we're a first-in-class offering. We're FDA approved. It is a customizable application fulfilled headset. So the headset comes loaded, but also with flexibility so that the clinicians, the therapists on our team can use this VR environment to adapt their treatment plans and cater them specifically to each patient. The carryover of patients is phenomenal. Patients are engaged. Unlike a traditional therapy setting where you go to PT, they give you a handout with these exercises that you're never going to do at home. Patients are really embracing the VR, and they're giving hours every day in the VR setting. We offer physical therapy, cognitive therapy. Like I mentioned, the cognitive piece is combined with the motor. So we have movement and cognition at once, which really strengthens that neural pathway. So again, the patient is potentially, punching different colored buttons and utilizing cognitive flexibility, alternating attention, appropriately moving at the same time to solidify those neural pathways. We also see lots of patients with chronic pain, insomnia, stress and anxiety, even hot flashes. We have a whole app that's called Luna And there's like this, winter wonderland that creates a cold environment for people. You can actually kind of see your breath as you're walking through the cold environment, and it reduces the symptoms of hot flashes. It's very, very effective for our patients. Again, our applications target motor, cognitive, and mental health scenarios for each patient. So I did just a short cognitive case study since that's our focus today. So we had a patient, patient K, referred by her PCP, 73-year-old female, has anxiety disorder, complains of memory loss, and difficulty completing tasks that require multiple steps. She had trouble remembering phone numbers, names, lists of items, and she was scheduled for an initial comprehensive eval with an OT. And the reason she saw OT was because she did have that anxiety disorder and the cognition interplay. So she saw the OT over remote telehealth, and there ruled out contraindications. She was deemed appropriate for virtual reality therapy. A plan of care was established, just like traditional therapy, making notes in her electronic medical record, long-term goals of managing stress and anxiety, improving attention, focus, and memory, and then learning relaxation techniques to improve sleep quality. As she went through the cognitive therapy, her initial complaints were difficulty with focus, multi-step reasoning, and like I said, memory. Her evaluation showed mild cognitive impairment. We did some objective measures outside of the VR just to get a handle on where she was. We also do self-report questionnaires, and she did present with this impaired attention, executive function deficits, and memory deficits. So her plan of care was made by her therapist, and using virtual reality assisted interventions, the applications below were used. So Color Match, Memorize, Luna, and Mindset, which are our four applications that were prescribed for this patient. And the settings in the VR were also prescribed, but patients are able to flex out of the prescribed settings and kind of explore on their own where they can take their therapy. So she had 6 weeks of therapy 2 times a week with the OT. So 45 minutes to an hour sessions, just akin to traditional or conventional therapy. The patient would meet with her therapist over an online streaming Zoom call, and then she would have VR practice at least 5 times a week on her own. The outcomes were great. She had increased awareness in anxiety triggers. She was able to manage her symptoms. Her cognitive function went from being able to remember 10-digit phone numbers and completion of tasks consisting with multiple steps with no difficulty. A big takeaway from this patient, a side note to her cognitive success, was that she noted not needed to take her Ambien or her lorazepam since she started using the headset. So these are good in the moment, instead of needing to take a pill for anxiety, the patient put on the headset and utilized the relaxing apps. The objective data that we're able to see in our data portal, these are just some examples of what we can see and what we can measure. So the motion indicators, we can see average response time. So obviously the lower the number, the better. Average action time from the time the patient initiates a movement until they hit the target. The quality of movement. So patients with Parkinson's, who've had stroke, we can see smoothness of motion, tremor, bradykinesia, freezing. All these things are able to be picked up within the VR sessions. And then the results, in terms of percent of success, mistakes. We show graphs so you can see right hand, left time, action time. All of the data are pronounced and defined in our application. In terms of our Memorize application, these are, I know it looks like a lot, but so these were number of items remembered per session. So you can see December 22nd, all the way on the left side, she was remembering just about 6 items. February 13th, she was up to 15 items. So she was able to progress through, you know, less than 2 months in this therapy with amazing results. Again, over time, showing the success of this patient ability to remember items, and again, objective data. So basically her outcomes for the color match, her response time initially was 0.87 seconds, and her response time at discharge was 0.5 seconds. Same thing, so Memorize, number of items on eval, 4, and 15 on discharge. So huge progress. Also, her adult executive function inventory initial score was 21, and her discharge was 19. And for working memory, 12 and 9. So big progress across the board for this patient. You know, we are showing consistent, successful outcomes. And satisfaction with patients. You know, we have ongoing testimonials from patients just saying that they're more motivated, they're able to take what they're doing in the applications and move it over to functional daily living. In terms of our NPS score, so what percentage of patients would recommend our applications to other people, way above the average. And this is actually, we compared it to Amazon and Facebook, and we were above those. So I'll take that as a win. And then just some patient testimonials, just, you know, breath control, anxiety relief, advancing difficulty in memory, coordination, reaction times, and really improving memory significantly. And so with that, I will stop my sharing, and then would love to answer any questions anybody has about XR Health.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jessica.
You're very welcome. Sorry about the video. Again, I will send it out via email. So if you could pass it along, that would be great.
Wonderful. Okay, great. Yeah, so from here, we'll be transitioning to our Q&A session. So until 11 o'clock, feel free to ask our guests and co-hosts any questions you may have. Feel free to unmute or use the chat below as well.
Well, Jessica and Amir, thank you for those wonderful presentations. I know I learned so much in such a short period of time. So we're going to open up for questions now. Just as a reminder, I'm Judy Paw. I'm at USC and a part of our Smart VR Center. And I'm joined to co-host this panel session with Ashwin Sakre, who's also on. So if you want to go ahead and ask questions live, please go ahead if you want to unmute and ask those, or if you'd rather post them in the chat, you can do that as well, and we will go through those questions. So to start, we can, Ashwin, if you want to go ahead and look at any of the questions posted in chat, we can start there as people think about their questions.
Yeah. So, hi, I'm Ashwin. We did have a question in the Zoom chat that was directed to Jessica from Florencia. And the question was, were the benefits of VR therapy on this patient sustained after the therapy ended?
They were actually. We have done follow-ups on our patients after intervals of time, and they were sustained actually. So yeah. Yep.
Great. Thanks, Jessica, for that answer. I have a few questions I'd like to ask, and some that were sent to me as well. So this is actually my own question. Amir, you talked about how we're really in this era of big data. So over a period of just 3 minutes, you said we can collect over 200,000 data points. I mean, that's tremendous. What do you think about our current ability? It's a tough problem, but it's not insurmountable, which is, how do we handle this data? How do we analyze it in meaningful ways? where we still can get at our primary goal of X, of brain health, of cognition, but putting it all together in ways in which we can interpret them and we can make a recommendation for an N of 1 for a given patient. How do we do that? And do you think that we're currently there with our analytic strategies?
We're not there yet, but it's really like a village kind of situation. And like our particular startup doesn't have necessarily the right people right now to answer those questions. We're working with one company called Fourth IR, and they're an AI learning tool company, and we're specifically working with them on this LOI that we just submitted to ADNI on creating a biomarker out of our VR gameplay as an early detection of Alzheimer's disease. That's invariably requiring a lot of data scientists and machine learning sort of profiles to come into the picture and take a stab at that problem from their angle. Getting to this point of having these 11 games and fully released and being happy with the product up to that level. Hussein, my CTO, he was telling me, why did you have to get us into a company where we have to create a library of these things first before then we can even be ready to get into the next phase of clinical studies that needs to be done in partnership with institutes that we have to work with, create chemistry with. So much of that legwork and going from one step to the next, and now we're ready at a point where we can get clean data to a certain extent. But I'm sure a lot of the data that we're collecting, some of it's noise that we don't know yet. And so that's going to have a whole process of being able to bring in AI learning tools into the picture in these studies in parallel. For example, we have a senior living community, the largest one here in Portugal, where we're actually based. And they're going to be doing a 3-month pilot study. They want a clinical protocol, even part of that 3 months, where they can actually be able to see what's going on. But we want to have a third partner come in who has an AI learning capabilities, like a think tank of some sort, and really work at it from that angle. So we're right at the cusp of answering some of these questions, but it's taken us a long time. It took us 3 years to get to the point where we can even get ready to pass the baton. So I don't know, and I hope we do, because the promise of non-invasive biomarkers coming from our own personal data that we generate just by like living and breathing and walking and eating and sleeping. I mean, that's like huge. I don't think we understand what the empowered patient means, and I think I look at the next 5 years as being very, very bright on the horizon. Needless to say, I'm not talking about other things in the world, but in terms of technology and enabling us to take our health, or at least our mental health, into our hands is really inspiring to me.
Thanks, Amir.
Thank you. We have another question in chat. Can both Jessica and Amir talk a little bit about whether or how their products can be reimbursed by insurance?
I can, sure, absolutely. So we are covered by insurance, Medicare, Massachusetts, California, Florida. We have a bunch of states, Illinois. We don't have every state covered because we just haven't gotten to the collaboration with every insurance company, but we do take Blue Cross Blue Shield. We take a bunch of private insurances. So we are working on getting coverage for every state across the 50 states. But right now we are working with most states and coverage. So the patient would basically be seen as they would as a PT or OT or speech in an outpatient clinic. Any copays would, just be paid just the same way as an outpatient clinic. So it's been great that we can get coverage.
If you look at last June, there was like this news that came out, at least for me, nerds like me. It's like landing on the moon kind of news. And it was that Akili Interactive, their Endeavor RX game, was declared by the FDA the first video game to be prescribed by a doctor instead of a pharmaceutical drug for pediatric ADHD. That's the first video game declared as a freaking medicine. Okay, so I'm always excited to talk about that and the brainchild of that whole movement of making a video game a digital medicine that's now reimbursable or in the process of being reimbursable for this particular condition is Adam Ghazali, of course. And I've had the pleasure of talking to him about it, but it took, I don't know, a number of years, up to 10 years before they could break through there, and the FDA finally started greasing the wheels. And now they even have a new category for VR called medical extended reality. And you have, the fine pioneers of XR Health and Applied VR, all of them going on a bandwagon of having different applications being considered a prescribed treatment one by one. I think Applied VR was just 4 or 5 months ago they announced it, which was huge. And so it's the same track for us. We're beginning these studies, and some of these studies require to be, quite long, 24 months, 36 months, but within 3 to 5 years, we do see ourselves as being a prescribed treatment, a digital medicine, but a place where you would ultimately come in as a pharmaceutical for brain health of this kind and that kind. But I don't see it necessarily as being a reimbursable solution that can be used in isolation. I think it will do best to be paired with traditional methodologies and traditional medicines. And really that's where I see the real best way of this kind of stuff being used. I do see a lot of hardcore saying like, digital medicine and it's going to be an alternative, or, that's a little too extreme for me. I think that the future will be something more in the middle ground where you ultimately have digital solutions pairing to have even a marginal outcome higher, like kind of synergy when you pair them together. But I do see us as going towards being a pair model. It's just not something we're prioritizing until probably a couple of years from now.
Great. Thank you, Jessica and Amir. We have a question. I don't know, Laura, if you want to say what the question is over Zoom. Because
Yeah.
you can actually type out the question.
Yeah, thank you, Ashwin. Actually, it's something related to what actually Nancy was now typing. So I was wondering, we are sort of the last generation that transit without internet, right? So we are used to have internet, but we rise and we grown up without internet. But it's not the same case, for example, for my grandpa or my grandma. So I was wondering how difficult or how easier it is for seniors to adopt this technology and to be proficient using this technology to get the data that is required to make an assessment of their cognitive capacity. So if you can comment on that, it will be amazing, guys.
Sorry, I was mute. It's a fun question. I'm excited about that question because I think it's inherently flawed from our point of view. I think when I've seen VR being applied in the senior living communities with amazing companies like Rendeavor, working with the AARP with their app called Alcove, specifically focused on the elderly. And my last article on VentureBeat was in September 2019 on this particular use case. It's quite surprising that, I think the technology that is alien to the elderly or elderly, I think it's the wrong thing, older adults, is screen-based devices. I think when you look at VR simulations and experiences, my experience has been that it's actually much more intuitive and natural. And initially when you see, older adults using VR for the first time, my prejudice stopped me from expecting that they would actually like it, enjoy it, and probably want to come back to it. For isolation therapy, it's been fantastic. I mean, isolation therapy is so important, especially during the pandemic. It's been I think being isolated is worse than like a pack of cigarettes a day or something like this for cognitive health and deterioration. So my experience is that's actually not something that I've kind of run into. I've seen that actually VR is adopted quite well. With older adults. I think if the content is developed well, we, for example, have an accessibility design expert in the prototyping stage of the games, always from the ground up. So we're designing it so that the game adapts whether the person's standing up or sitting down. It adapts according to whether they're colorblind, and they can indicate it in the accessibility settings. It can adapt in the accessibility settings if the person is in a wheelchair or mobility restricted. These are things that have to be put into play right from the very beginning. So I mean, healthy older adults, but if someone has a particular impairment of some sort or a special need, then it's important for accessibility to be in the design phase inherently. But with all that considered, my experience has been that it's actually been surprisingly well adopted by older adults.
Yeah, Amir, I would agree with you in terms of easy adoption. I think there's hesitation a lot initially, and it's more of the children of the older adults. I've found the children saying, "Oh, my dad won't do that. He doesn't even have a cell phone or whatever." But again, like you said, when you put the headset on, it's an alternate reality, and people transform, and they just go engage, they go right in and they engage. It's like saying someone, like if you put a movie on, they're not going to watch it. I mean, it's like just a fully immersive environment. It's like saying, oh, if you take that person to the Grand Canyon, they're gonna close their eyes and not look, you know. It's reality. So there's nothing that, you know, when they look at the device from a distance, they might say, oh, that's weird. But again, as soon as we get it on their head, they are immersed and sometimes addicted in a good way. So yeah.
I agree. We box people. I think we box them into that prejudice of ours. We want, I don't know, we want that to be true, some sick part of us, I don't know. And then we see it not happen. So I totally don't see it happening anymore. I think one thing I've noticed about our error is sometimes we make things, maybe we want to also make it enjoyable for the general population and make it, you know, they're closed loop games, so it plateaus whatever level you want to plateau at based on your comfort or your maximum, you know, capability. But we've made some of the environments sci-fi, so we've started to create alternative, you know, environments that you can switch to. You can switch from the sci-fi one onto the more naturalistic one, and you know, be submerged in water one. And we're trying to create these different environments, because that's one thing we've had criticism about. Maybe we shouldn't go full on robots and stuff like that. Have choice for people to. Ultimately, it's just another dimension of a layer of accessibility, to be honest. So.
Thank you, Amir and Jessica. Very enlightening.
All right, we have a couple questions from Nancy. I'll present the first one to both of you guys. What were the types of populations that were used to develop and validate your VR measurements? And were these people particularly tech savvy or not?
Well, you know, the early games we created, the prototypes, it actually makes my eyes bleed when I look at these ones, because they're, you know, it's 2 years ago, but the level of how horrible they looked was, you know, really something. But ultimately the same game mechanisms and so on was there now. Now it might be prettier in this current version that we have. But back then what we do is we would work with institutes like the Pacific Brain Health Center, and they would run tolerability tests. You know, what we were really doing is initially we created this white paper that you know, cites 76 peer-reviewed studies on why VR for this particular use case, and how our games, each one is designed as a translation of a standardized, you know, neuropsychological assessment tool like the MBAC task or the dual MBAC task, like as literally as possible, you know? So you're really translating something that's commonly used as literally as possible into a 3D rendered environment. And that's the low-hanging, you know, the lowest hanging fruit of creating these. And then sometimes ultimately you're going to run out of those examples. You're going to have to start making games that are inspired by, you know, these neuropsychological principles based on certain tests. But ultimately you're starting to innovate or create. And ultimately we always have our institutional partners working with us at that stage of prototyping. So it's not something our company does. We would do it based on working with them. And initially, at least for the first 5 to 7 games, it was always with the mind of a healthy older adult, someone who is even not even MCI, you know, they're pre-MCI, they might have some, you know, subjective, you know, they're noticing that their memory is not what it always used to be, but really not something that's objectively something that's an impairment. And that was the population. But beyond that, you know, there will be a level of refinement that will come into play as we do the study that's beginning next month or recruiting next month. When these studies go out and the sample sizes are much bigger and it's in a clinical protocol that is controlling for a lot of things that weren't in the design phase, ultimately we're going to realize that there are some of our, you know, products and solutions and games that need to be, you know, amended, fixed, thrown out the window. And so I think this is part of why we're so lonely in this space right now, you know, in terms of of companies that a lot of that overlap or do the same things. There's not many of us. And that's because it is a messy thing to go ahead with. You can't just create something perfect from the very beginning. You do your best using the best practices you have and the brightest people you can find, and you create what you can, and you look at the data, you look at the study results, and you have the courage to wipe it all clean and start again and fresh if the data tells you to. And that's really where we are.
And similar from my standpoint, from our standpoint, we had use cases, and we established what was appropriate for each use case. And we used mostly healthy older adults, not necessarily tech savvy, just, randomized. And that's how we did it with, again, many iterations of modifications and revamping things.
Great, thanks. I think it's approaching 11, so maybe this second part might be one of the last questions. And I know you guys work with different clinical populations and your games target different populations, but have you done any work to see if there are particular subsets of people or specific subject demographics that show more benefit from your VR assessments relative to other populations?
We have found, we've found patients with Parkinson's extremely able to make great progress and success in our VR, and also pain management and anxiety. So those are the three subcategories that we've had the most success with. But all of our patients really have had great success, but really we're seeing a lot with movement disorders, so neurologic disorders. And I think a lot of that is the movement and cognition that is integrated in the system. I think that's where the success comes in, and the ability to downregulate the nervous system. So going from sympathetic to parasympathetic nervous system, that shift, people aren't able to do that on their own. So you can't really think your way out of something, especially if you didn't think your way into it. So that anxiety loop that people get in, and what's necessary to do that downshift into the parasympathetic nervous system, which is that relaxed nervous system state. People are able to do that in the VR headset, and it's difficult to do it anywhere else. So that's been really effective.
We've only had preliminary results looking into the data specifically of the 15,000 users where we noticed, for example, the number of hours of sleep that are optimal for performance on X, Y, and Z cognitive functions. Or we noticed bizarrely that people who indicate being sad on the range of moods, they're actually high performers on certain memory and attention games. But it's very preliminary. And again, these are the kind of things, the insights that won't be Virtual Leap to say. It will be the studies saying based on the results, which are, again, just beginning next month. So we're looking forward to those types of insights about who actually benefits the most, and in what context and what conditions, and so on.
Okay, well, thank you again, Amir and Jessica. I think we'll conclude now. We're a few minutes over, but Jessica posted the link in the chat if you want to take it, note it really quickly before we close out. Thank you so much today for joining. I know I really enjoyed it and learned a lot, and your enthusiasm is contagious. So we appreciate you coming on, and for everybody else for joining, and hopefully we'll see you soon.